Even her tears are pathetic. Ji-hun sneered in Korean, wiping his hand after the slap as 20 men in designer suits burst into laughter. To them, Christy Walker was the perfect victim. The quiet, submissive housekeeper with no power, no voice, and no ability to fight back. They mocked her uniform, her silence, her lowered eyes, recording it all on their phones like entertainment. And she took it. Every insult, every humiliation, every moment they thought she was weak. Because they didn't know the legend she'd buried beneath an apron and false papers. A legend the underworld called Ghost. So when she finally lifted her head, when her breathing shifted into something they didn't recognize, in that moment, Ji-hun's smile faltered. Because predators recognize apex predators, even when they've been pretending to be prey. Christy Walker found the blood at 4:30 in the morning. Fresh, still warm. A splatter pattern on the marble floor beneath the East Wing study that hadn't been there when she'd left 12 hours ago. She knelt with her cleaning supplies, listening. Voices carried through the door. 3 men discussing a rival gang leader's execution as casually as other people discussed weather. "Make it look like an accident," one said. Christie's hands moved in steady circles, scrubbing someone's violence while they planned more of it. They didn't even glance at her. Good. That's how it needed to be. In the East Wing study, she cleaned around 3 men in expensive suits discussing a rival gang leader's execution as casually as other people discussed weather forecasts. "Make it look like an accident," one said. Sipping espresso Christy had prepared 20 minutes earlier. She dusted the bookshelf behind them, her hands steady, her breathing controlled. They didn't even glance at her. Good. That's how it needed to be. 2 years since Marcus bled out in her arms, whispering promises she'd sworn to keep. The thoughts circled through her mind like a prayer she couldn't stop reciting, a reminder of why she had chosen this life of deliberate smallness. Ji-hun found her in the hallway at 6:15, inspecting her work with the critical eye of a man who had built an empire on intimidation. Christie's hand had twitched toward a defensive position when he'd approached, an instinct she'd spent 2 years trying to kill. That instinct lived in a locked box beneath her apartment floorboards, and every day it got harder to keep it there. "You missed a spot," he said in English, pointing at a microscopic water stain on the mirror. His voice carried that particular tone, the one that said he enjoyed this. "Do it again. Properly this time." His 3 lieutenants materialized behind him, smirking, waiting for the show. Christy bowed her head, murmured an apology, and began re-cleaning the already spotless mirror while they watched and whispered jokes in Korean she pretended not to understand. Kwon, Ji-hun's enforcer, stepped closer than necessary. "Ji-hun Nim likes them broken," he said quietly, his breath hot against her ear. "That's why you're still here. You know your place." Christie's reflection stared back from the spotless mirror. The woman in the glass looked beaten, broken, safe. She wondered which was the lie. She returned to her apartment that evening, a sparse one-room space with a bed, a table, and nothing that spoke of personality or past. Beneath the floorboards, wrapped in oilcloth, sat a locked metal box she hadn't opened in 23 months. Sometimes her fingers would hover over the loose board, trembling with the weight of what lay beneath. But she never lifted it, never looked inside. That life was dead. In the darkness before sleep, muscle memory took over. Christy moved through martial arts forms she had performed 10,000 times, her body remembering what her mind tried to forget. Strikes that could crush windpipes, blocks that could shatter bones, movement that could make her disappear and reappear like smoke. She was mid-strike when the news anchor's voice made her freeze. The legendary operative known only as Ghost, presumed dead 2 years ago, was reportedly responsible for dismantling 3 major crime syndicates across Europe and Asia. Christy stopped mid-form, staring at the screen showing a blurred photograph she barely recognized. "I was Ghost, past tense. Now I'm just Christy Walker, nobody worth remembering. That's how I want it." She turned off the television and lay in the darkness, wondering how long she could keep living a lie. Wondering if invisibility was protection or just another kind of prison. If you've ever felt invisible, if you've ever been underestimated or made to feel small, then you understand why Christie's story matters. Don't let her struggle disappear into silence. Subscribe so you'll know what happens when the invisible finally decide to be seen, and share this with someone who needs to remember that quiet doesn't mean powerless. The private dinner 3 nights later required 14 different forks. Christie placed each one with trembling precision while 12 men who'd ordered executions over breakfast discussed human cargo like it was wine. Christie moved between them like a ghost, pouring wine, clearing plates, existing in that space where servants become invisible. The conversation flowed around her in Korean, English, Russian, a mix of languages bonded by greed. Then Ji-hun's voice cut through the noise, and Christie's hand froze mid-pour. Young, Korean, easily controlled. 20 girls, European delivery, 50,000 each. He said it the way someone might order furniture. The wine bottle trembled in her grip, just slightly, just enough. Across the table, Yuki's eyes locked onto Christie's hands. The woman studied her with the cold calculation of a snake deciding whether something was prey or threat. Christie forced her breathing steady, finished pouring, moved to the next glass. She wasn't supposed to be in the West Corridor after 10. But the cognac stain Ji-hun had made on his office carpet would set if she didn't treat it within the hour. Christie gathered her supplies and took the route she always took, down the West Corridor, past the door that was always locked. Except tonight it wasn't. The door stood open just enough to show stairs descending into darkness. Christie's hand tightened on her cleaning caddy. She knew what smart people did with unlocked doors in houses like this. She also knew what happened to girls who got locked in basements. Her feet moved before she decided. The basement was cold, lit by a single bulb that cast everything in sickly yellow. The basement smelled like fear. Mattresses lined the floor in neat rows. Too many mattresses, all of them small. Christie's throat closed when she saw the chains bolted to the wall at intervals measured for bodies. Small chains. Wrist-sized chains for wrists that hadn't finished growing. On the corkboard, faces. 23 faces. Children's faces. With prices written beneath them like they were livestock. $50,000. $65,000. $45,000. Discount for damaged goods. Christie's stomach turned. Her fists clenched. And that's when she heard footsteps behind her. Lost, little mouse? Kwan's voice dripped with malice. His hand shot toward her throat before she could turn. Training kicked in, muscle memory faster than thought. She deflected, twisted, her hand moving to counterstrike at his carotid. But she caught herself mid-motion, forced her body to collapse instead, let him shove her hard against the concrete wall. Pain exploded across her shoulder blade. Good. Let him think he won. You didn't see anything? Kwan snarled, his face inches from hers. Ji-hun Nim doesn't like curious help. They tend to disappear. He released her with a shove that sent her sprawling, then disappeared up the stairs. Christie lay there for a moment, breathing hard, not from fear but from the effort of holding back what she really was. Back in her apartment, she couldn't stop shaking. Her hands remembered the counterstrike she had aborted, the dozen ways she could have ended Kwan in 3 seconds. She knelt beside the loose floorboard, her fingers hovering over it. Marcus's voice echoed from 2 years ago, blood bubbling from his lips in that Prague warehouse. Don't let my death be the reason you stop fighting the good fight. But she had promised herself, promised his memory, that she would never kill again. Except now there were 20 girls with prices beneath their photographs. 20 lives that would be destroyed while she scrubbed floors and played invisible. What happens when doing nothing becomes its own kind of violence? Christie pulled out her phone with shaking hands. She'd sworn she'd never use this number again. Her thumbs moved across the screen. Ghost protocol. The response came in seconds. All capitals. Denied. Stay dark. She stared at those words while 23 children's faces burned behind her eyes. The question burned in her chest as she finally lifted the floorboard and stared at the locked box beneath. Some choices hunt you no matter how far you run. Subscribe to see what Christie decides when silence becomes betrayal, because sometimes the hardest battle isn't against enemies. It's against the person you promised yourself you'd never become again. The box stayed locked. For now. Christy returned to the estate the next evening, her mind still churning with images of those photographs, those prices, those chains. She moved through her duties on autopilot, serving drinks at Ji-hun's private gathering, 20 men celebrating some deal she didn't care to understand. She reached for the wine Ji-hun had specified, her fingers closing around the 2015 vintage instead of the 2012. A small mistake, the kind anyone could make. She realized it the moment she started pouring, but by then Ji-hun's eyes had already found the label. Stupid woman. His voice cracked like a whip across the room. Conversations died. Every head turned. Do you know how much you've embarrassed me? The back of his hand connected with her face before she could process the words. The impact sent her stumbling sideways, her lips splitting against her teeth. Blood filled her mouth. The room erupted. 20 men laughed like it was the funniest thing they'd ever seen. Some pulled out phones, recording, preserving her humiliation for entertainment later. Look at her, Ji-hun announced in Korean, then switched to English for the foreign guests. This is what happens when you hire cheap labor. They're good for cleaning and nothing else. Christy dropped to her knees, the position they expected, the position that confirmed everything they believed about her. Kwon stumbled forward, drunk on expensive vodka, his words slurring but his malice sharp. Ji-hun Nim is smart. He only hires broken women, already submissive, already trained to take abuse. Makes life easier. Another lieutenant chimed in, his voice carrying across the room. My wife asks why I don't hire from agencies. I tell her, why pay for training when trauma does it for free? The men roared. Some pounded tables. Others raised glasses in toast to Ji-hun's wisdom. Christy remained kneeling, blood dripping from her chin onto the marble floor she had scrubbed that morning. Something shifted inside her chest. Not breaking, crystallizing. Like water becoming ice, like soft metal becoming steel. Her breathing changed without her permission. Deep, controlled, centering. The old patterns flooded back, threat assessment mapping the room, exit routes calculating automatically, improvised weapons cataloging in her peripheral vision. 23 potential targets. 14 hard surfaces within reach. 3 exits. 2 minutes to neutralize everyone present. The thoughts came unbidden, unwanted, undeniable. Ji-hun leaned down, his breath reeking of whiskey. Clean yourself up. You're disgusting. And if you ever embarrass me again, I'll make sure you understand respect. Christy rose slowly, bowed with perfect submission, and walked toward the door. Her eyes stayed down. Her posture stayed broken. Everything screamed weakness. But in the hallway, alone, she finally unclenched her fists. The knuckles had been locked in perfect striking position throughout the entire humiliation. She had held a technique that could crush a throat, snap a neck, end a life. She didn't submit. She chose restraint. But as she touched her split lip and felt the rage burning through 2 years of carefully constructed peace, that choice was evaporating like water on hot stone. Have you ever been pushed so far that something inside you just stops bending? Subscribe now because what happens next will show you exactly what men like Ji-hun forget. Some people don't break, they just decide when to stop pretending. Christy knew something was wrong the moment she opened her apartment door. The air felt disturbed. Her few possessions sat slightly askew. Books shifted on the shelf, kitchen drawers not quite closed, the mattress corner lifted and imperfectly replaced. Ji-hun's men had been here, searching for surveillance equipment, confirmation of their paranoia about a spy in their midst. They had torn through everything with the arrogance of people who thought themselves thorough. But they hadn't found what mattered. They didn't know to look beneath the floorboards. She waited until midnight, hands shaking so violently she almost couldn't grip the floorboard. The metal box emerged from darkness like a coffin being exhumed, and it felt like one. Inside, 3 passports bearing her face but different names, a disassembled handgun that had ended 17 lives, and Marcus's photograph. She lifted the picture with reverence. His smile, frozen forever at 32. His handwriting on the back, words she had memorized but couldn't bear to read. Some fights choose you. When they do, be the ghost they fear. Her fingers traced the inscription as tears she hadn't allowed herself in 2 years finally broke free. She spent the next 3 hours on her laptop, every hacking skill she had buried coming back like riding a bicycle. Jihan's operation unfolded across her screen, trafficking routes mapped, client lists exposed, shipping schedules documented. Then she found it. The consolidation party. 5 days from now, Jihan would finalize partnerships with Russian, Chinese, and Japanese syndicates. And 23 girls, aged 16 to 24, would be transported that same night. Their photographs stared at her from the screen. Babies. They were babies. Christy pulled out the burner phone she'd kept for emergencies. Her thumbs hovered over the keys. 2 years since she'd used this number. 2 years since she'd been ghost. She typed 4 words. Authorization to operate. The response came in seconds. All capitals. Negative. Ghost is dead. She stared at those words. At the 23 faces on her screen. At Marcus's photo beside the laptop. Her fingers moved. Then I'll haunt them anyway. She threw the phone against the wall before Sentinel could respond. It shattered. Good. Some decisions didn't need permission. She opened the gun case, her hands moving through the familiar motions of reassembly. The weapon took shape in her palms, cold and efficient. Then she stopped, looked at it, really looked at it. She shook her head and carefully disassembled it again, placing each piece back in the oilcloth. She lifted the reassembled gun, felt its familiar weight. 17 lives. That's what this weapon represented. 17 times she'd chosen efficiency over justice, distance over accountability. Men like Jihan feared weapons. They understood weapons. Christy needed them to fear something they couldn't understand. She disassembled the gun with practiced ease, placed each piece back in the oilcloth. For you, she whispered to Marcus's photo. I was ghost with a weapon. For them, I'll be something worse. Sometimes we convince ourselves that staying quiet is the same as staying safe. But what happens when your silence protects the guilty instead of yourself? Subscribe to see what Christy does when the past stops asking permission to return, because her choice might just remind you of the strength you've been hiding from yourself. Stealing the evidence was easy. Jihan's arrogance made it easy. He left ledgers open on his desk, discussed wire transfers within earshot of the help, bragged about shipments to impress his lieutenants. What wasn't easy was watching him order custom champagne for the consolidation party while discussing which merchandise would fetch premium prices. Christy photographed his order forms with hands that wanted to break his neck. She cataloged every crime, encrypted every file, uploaded everything to FBI servers, Interpol, Korean National Police, 3 major media outlets. Dead man's switch. If she didn't cancel the release codes at specific intervals, the world would know. If Jihan killed her, the truth would bury him anyway. At the estate, Christy became something more dangerous than perfect. She became forgettable. More invisible than before. More obedient. More broken. She moved through rooms like smoke, anticipating needs before they were spoken, disappearing the moment tasks were complete. Yuki caught her in the hallway on the second day, those calculating eyes studying Christy's face. You're different lately, quieter than usual. Christy kept her eyes down, her voice small. I'm trying not to make mistakes, ma'am. After last time. Yuki's hand lifted Christy's chin, forcing eye contact. Fear makes people useful. Remember that. Christy nodded, let her eyes water slightly, then scurried away when dismissed. Behind her, Yuki watched for a long moment before disappearing into Jihan's office. The consolidation party preparations turned the estate into organized chaos. Jihan demanded perfection. Every surface polished, every detail flawless, every staff member working triple shifts. Christy volunteered for everything. More shifts meant more access, more intelligence, more opportunities to map the house down to the last exit and weapon. She memorized guard rotations, identified security blind spots, noted which doors stuck and which hinges squeaked. Kwon found her in the kitchen on day 4, his presence filling the doorway like a threat. You've been very good lately. Learned your lesson. His hand reached out, fingers tracing her jaw where the bruise had faded to yellow-green. Christie's body cataloged 17 ways to break those fingers before conscious thought could intervene: the wrist joint, the metacarpal, the elbow nerve cluster. She forced her breathing steady and dropped her eyes. "Yes, sir. I understand my place now." He smiled, and it was the smile of a predator savoring future prey. "Good girl. Maybe after the party, Ji-hun-nim will let me reward you personally." His fingers lingered too long on her throat. Christie nodded, swallowed the rage burning in her chest like acid, and watched him walk away whistling. Her hands gripped the counter edge hard enough to hurt. For days, just 4 more days of this performance. That night, back in her apartment, she trained like she hadn't in 2 years. Forms flowed into strikes, strikes into combinations, combinations into breathing patterns that centered her completely. Sweat poured down her face. Her muscles screamed. And in the mirror across the room, she watched herself transform. The meek housekeeper was gone. Something harder, sharper, deadlier stared back. "Christie Walker is the disguise," she whispered to her reflection. "Ghost is who I am, and it's time to stop pretending." Her reflection smiled back, and it wasn't a kind smile. It was the smile of a hunter who'd been playing prey for far too long. Her phone, the new burner she'd bought that afternoon, buzzed on the table. Unknown number. She stared at it. Only one person could have this number. She picked it up. Sentinel's message glowed on screen. "Christie, whoever you think you are, you're not that person anymore. You can't come back from this." She read it twice. Typed 4 words. "I'm counting on it." Then she threw the phone against the wall and watched it shatter. Some bridges needed burning. The consolidation party transformed Ji-hun's estate into something out of a crime lord's fantasy. 300 guests filled the opulent ballroom, Russian mobsters in $1,000 suits, Chinese triads wearing jade rings worth more than houses, Japanese yakuza with tattoos hidden beneath silk shirts. Crystal chandeliers cast everything in golden light that made the gathering look almost legitimate. Almost. Christie arrived for her shift and found Kwan waiting with 3 other housekeepers, holding garment bags that made her stomach turn. "You're not just staff tonight," he explained, his grin spreading wide. "You're decoration, entertainment. Make our guests feel powerful." The modified uniform was designed to humiliate. Skirt shorter than any professional garment had right to be, neckline cut low enough to make every movement precarious, fabric tight enough to restrict and expose simultaneously. Christie put it on, feeling the transformation from invisible servant to visible object. She entered the ballroom and felt every eye find her, catalog her, dismiss her humanity in favor of whatever fantasy she represented. She moved through the crowd serving champagne while hands grabbed at her waist, her hips. Men made propositions in Russian, Korean, Mandarin, English. The language of objectification needed no translation. Ji-hun stood at the ballroom's center like a king holding court, raising his glass in toast after toast. "To power," he declared, his voice carrying over the crowd. "To those who take what they want, and to those too weak to stop us." The criminals roared approval, drinking to their own impunity, celebrating the suffering they caused like it was an achievement. Christie served drinks and felt her rage crystallizing into something cold and sharp and absolutely lethal. "You, come here." Ji-hun's voice cut across the noise. Christie approached, knowing every eye was tracking her movement. Ji-hun grabbed her wrist, pulling her into the circle of powerful men. "Gentlemen, this is what I mean about control. This woman." He held her arm up like a trophy, completely broken. "Watch." He raised his hand, and Christie saw what he wanted, the flinch, the fear, the confirmation of his power. She gave him nothing, didn't blink, didn't breathe differently, didn't move. His hand hung in the air, and confusion flickered across his face. "See," he tried to recover. Not even fear anymore, just acceptance. That's perfect control. His hand came down, fast and hard, meant to split her lip again in front of everyone. Christie's hand came up faster. She caught his wrist mid-swing, her grip iron, her eyes lifting to meet his for the first time in 2 years. The sound of skin on skin echoed through sudden, absolute silence. Every conversation stopped. Every glass paused halfway to lips. 300 criminals stared at the impossible sight of prey catching a predator's strike. Ji-hun's eyes widened, shock replacing arrogance. "Let go," he ordered, his voice uncertain. Christie's grip tightened until she felt bones grinding together. When she spoke, her voice carried to every corner of that silent ballroom. "No." Christie's voice cut through the silence like a blade through silk. "I've served you for 2 years. Cleaned your blood off floors. Listened to your plans. Watched you break people. And stayed silent." Ji-hun tried to pull away, yanking his arm with the full force of panic. Her grip didn't budge. His wrist might as well have been caught in a steel trap. But silence isn't weakness. It's a choice. My choice. And I'm done choosing it. She released him with a small push that shouldn't have done anything. But Ji-hun stumbled backward like he'd been shoved by a charging bull, crashing into his inner circle. Kwon moved first, rage and vodka overriding his survival instinct. "You're dead." He lunged across the space between them, fist cocked back for a haymaker that would have shattered her jaw. Christie sidestepped with the smallest movement, barely a shift of weight, and Kwon's momentum carried him past her straight into the champagne tower. Crystal exploded in a cascade of glass and expensive alcohol. The crash echoed through the ballroom like a starting gun. 8 security operatives converged from different angles, professional killers who had ended lives for Ji-hun without hesitation. Christie's breathing centered, her stance shifted, and something ancient and lethal took over. This is what she was. This is what she'd always been. The first operative reached for her throat. She redirected his arm, used his own weight and momentum, and sent him crashing into a marble pillar with enough force to crack bone. He dropped like a puppet with cut strings. The second swung a fist at her head. She ducked under it, swept his leg, and gravity did the rest. He fell face first into the shattered champagne glass, screaming. The third and fourth attacked together, coordinated, trained. Christie moved between them like water finding cracks in stone, making them hit each other instead of her. One went down with his partner's elbow in his temple. The other caught a knee to his own groin. No wasted movement. No excessive force. Surgical precision. The remaining 4 hesitated, and that hesitation was fatal. Around the ballroom's edges, the mob bosses leaned forward, suddenly interested. Dmitri, the Russian Pakhan, whispered something that sounded like prayer. "It can't be." Christie dismantled the remaining security with brutal efficiency. A dislocated shoulder here, a hyperextended knee there, solar plexuses crushed with palm strikes that left grown men gasping like fish on dry land. Non-lethal but devastating. Each one fell incapacitated but alive, because she wasn't here to kill. She was here to teach. When the last operative hit the floor, Christie stood in the center of the ballroom, her breathing steady, her modified uniform barely wrinkled. Around her lay Ji-hun's broken pride. 8 men who had been paid to be unkillable, destroyed by a woman they dismissed as decoration. Christie reached into her apron pocket and every eye in the ballroom tracked the movement. Hands reached for concealed weapons. Bodies tensed for violence. She pulled out a tablet. Not a gun. Not a knife. Just a small black screen that somehow felt more dangerous than any weapon in the room. "I've been documenting everything," she announced, her voice carrying to every corner. 2 years of trafficking routes, client lists, financial transactions, Yuki's offshore accounts, corrupt official payments, murder confessions. She held up the tablet, tilting it so the projection screens caught the file directories scrolling across its surface. Folders labeled with names that made powerful men flinch. Already uploaded to FBI, Interpol, Korean National Police, and 4 major international news organizations. Automatic release in. She checked the timer. 38 minutes unless I enter a cancellation code. Ji-hun's face drained of color until he looked like a corpse standing upright. "You're bluffing." Christie tapped the screen once. The ballroom's projection system flickered, then displayed a news alert in real time. Breaking, international trafficking ring evidence leaked online. Panic rippled through the crowd like a contagion. Mob bosses turned on Ji-hun with fury etched into their faces. He hadn't just destroyed himself. He'd compromised them all. Yuki moved toward the exit, her usual calculation replaced by raw survival instinct. Christie's voice froze her mid-step. Your accounts are frozen. I sent your information to your bosses in Seoul. They know you've been skimming. Yuki's mask shattered completely, terror flooding her features. Ji-hun pulled a gun from inside his jacket, his hands shaking so badly he could barely aim. You've destroyed everything. The room held its breath. 300 criminals watched to see if their world would end with a gunshot. Christie didn't flinch, didn't move, just looked at him with something close to pity. Then pull the trigger. Add murder to your charges. 300 witnesses. Ji-hun's finger tightened on the trigger. Christie moved like lightning, closed the distance before anyone could blink, redirected his gun hand upward, struck the nerve cluster in his wrist. The weapon clattered to the marble floor. She caught it mid-fall, ejected the magazine with practiced ease, cleared the chamber, and tossed both pieces in opposite directions. I don't need weapons, she said quietly. I am the weapon. She turned to the frozen crowd. There are 23 girls in the basement. They're leaving with me tonight. Anyone who tries to stop me can end up like them. She gestured at the groaning security detail scattered across broken glass and spilled champagne. Silence answered her. Christie walked to the basement entrance, her footsteps echoing. Kwan, you have the key. Use it. Kwan fumbled with his keyring, his hands trembling. The door opened. Young women emerged, scared and confused, blinking in the golden light. Christie spoke to them in Korean, her voice gentle for the first time all night. You're safe now. Police are 3 minutes away. Walk through the front door. Don't look back. They left, some crying, some stunned. Christie turned back to Ji-hun. You built your empire on people you thought were powerless. You forgot that power isn't always loud. Sometimes it's patient. Sometimes it waits. And sometimes it destroys everything when it finally moves. The sirens should have brought relief. Instead, Christie felt the weight of 2 years pressing down. Every floor she'd scrubbed, every insult she'd swallowed, every girl whose face she'd memorized. Red and blue lights flooded through the windows. Ji-hun staggered to his feet, broken and desperate. Who are you? The question came out like a child asking about monsters under the bed. Dimitri's voice cut through the silence like a death sentence. Ghost. The ghost. 15 syndicates destroyed. We thought Prague killed you. Recognition rippled through the ballroom. Fear replacing arrogance on every face. Ji-hun staggered backward. Ghost was a legend. Not real. Christie met his eyes. Prague did kill me. But ghosts don't stay dead when there's unfinished business. Pride overrode whatever survival instinct Ji-hun had left. He lunged one final time, reaching for her throat with both hands. Pride made him lunge. Stupidity made him think he had a chance. Christie ended it with a single palm strike to his solar plexus, the same technique Marcus had taught her in Prague before he died teaching. Precise, controlled, non-lethal but devastating. Ji-hun collapsed gasping for air he couldn't find. Christie crouched beside him, voice low enough that only he could hear. You broke women because you thought we'd stay broken. But some of us break different, we break open. She stood, leaving him gasping on the floor he'd made her scrub. Police flooded in through every entrance. Christie raised her hands, calm. Christie Walker, those women are trafficking victims. Evidence is uploaded to your servers. These men are your suspects. Federal agents pushed through, and one froze when he saw her face. Ghost? You're supposed to be... Christie finished his sentence. Dead. But I came back for this. They escorted her out, but in the chaos of arresting 300 criminals, she slipped away like smoke. The news played on every channel. Massive trafficking ring exposed. 23 women rescued. Ji-hun in handcuffs, his expensive suit rumpled. His empire collapsed into rubble. Yuki arrested at the airport trying to flee. The rescued women reunited with families, crying, grateful, alive. Christie knelt at Marcus's grave 3 days later, placing her retirement papers on the headstone. "I used your gift one more time," she whispered. "I hope that's okay. I hope you'd understand." Her phone buzzed. Sentinel's message glowed on the screen. "Impressive work. Disavowed officially. Celebrated unofficially. The world needs Ghost." Christy watched the sunset paint the cemetery gold. She typed slowly. "Ghost is retired. Permanently this time. But Christy Walker isn't hiding anymore. She's just living. And that's enough." She stood, turning from the grave. A young woman approached, one of the 23, barely 19. "Thank you," she said in Korean. "You saved us. What's your name?" Christy smiled, and it was real this time. Just someone who chose to stop being quiet. She walked away into the city free, neither running from her past nor consumed by it. Just living. They thought silence meant weakness. They forgot that some people choose their battles. And when those people fight, empires fall. Sometimes the most dangerous thing you can do is underestimate the quiet ones. Because we're not weak. We're just waiting. If Christy's story moved you, don't let it end here. Subscribe and share it with someone who needs to remember that their voice matters, that their strength is real, and that choosing when to fight makes victory even sweeter.